course, as well. So let's go on to cover what's happened in Georgia. The Foreign Agents Registration Act is now law. As in most countries, the head of state here, President Salome Zurabishvili, a French Georgian who's very pro-EU, wasn't able to stop it. We'll go straight to the US response here from the Senate. So the two senior senators for this kind of issue, Senator Jim Risch and Senator Jean Shaheen, of the rhyming name, have issued a slap on the wrist already to the Georgians, saying that this is a dark day for Georgian democracy. And they speak of hundreds of thousands of Georgians continuing to peacefully protest. Well, Tbilisi is, well, anyone's guess. The official population is somewhere north of 1 million. It could be nearer 2 by this stage, because half the country, in a population of less than 4 million, lives here now de facto, because they're all looking for work here. But hundreds of thousands in this not very huge city, geographically, would be hard to contrive. And I would say it's more like in the mid tens of thousands from my personal impression, having been here a couple of weeks. It's the hypocrisy that gets people just straight away. Here, for example, north of the US in Canada, the National Post has been reporting as of last week that the federal government has been putting together legislation to oblige foreign agents to register. I am not suggesting an equivalence of content between the two acts. That's something that needs a fine legal tooth comb. But there are new offences being created in Canadian law. Similar developments in Britain, Australia, several continental European countries as well, to oblige people to register as foreign donors and foreign-funded agents. We also see that there will be new offences in Canada, such as engaging in deceptive conduct at the direction of a foreign entity with the intent to influence the exercise of a democratic right in Canada. Now we're getting very close indeed to whether or not you give them merit, the claims of the ruling Georgian Dream Party, which got an 83 votes to 30 majority to pass this bill just yesterday. Now, on my Telegram channel, this immediately led to some cynicism. So a gentleman called Andrew, who subscribed to us, and he doesn't mention whether it's the Canadian bill he's talking about, but he says down the bottom there that the very same week that this is happening in Georgia, the West, I think he means Canada, has a bill that would require NGOs and independent media receiving more than 20% of its funding from foreign donors to register as bearing the interests of a foreign power. But my vagueness on this is probably the whole point. It could be any number of Western countries right now. So here is the mop-top recently installed Prime Minister, the latest Georgian Dream Prime Minister, Irakli Kobakhidze. He's given a press conference about having met with the most important US diplomats for this issue, which is Jim O'Brien, the Assistant Secretary of State in charge of this part of the world. Jim O'Brien would be the man who would advise on sanctions against the Georgian Dream leading figures, if necessary. And in that press conference, and we will go now to an excellent website called Civil Georgia, civil.ge, which is, of course, EU-leaning, but provides accurate write-ups in good English. He says he doesn't want the reputation of Georgia with the US to be damaged. It's a slightly bad English headline there, but never mind. And I won't read all of that, obviously. But here's the main thing. When RFL asked whether O'Brien, who is going to be the man who presses the sanctions button on Georgia if necessary, when Kobakhidze was asked whether O'Brien had talked about this, he said, vaguely, I told him many more details about a certain meeting. Who's this Ivanishvili? He's an oligarch who, and this we may be going into an extra time, but an oligarch who came from Russia to Georgia of Georgian ethnicity, who dropped the previous revolutionary president, Mikhail Saakashvili, 4 years into his presidency. And it is claimed by the people now rioting or various kinds of protesting on the streets, who skew very pro-EU and young and student-like, but by no means all of them are. They claim that Ivanishvili has turned this Georgian Dream Party into his puppet, and ultimately Russia's puppet. And look at this banner I've put at the top here. Kobakhidze was asked by one journalist, who's this global party of war that your party, Georgian Dream, keeps banging on about? And he said, well, I told Mr. O'Brien behind closed doors in detail what it is, but it's a delicate issue and they're dangerous people. Well, half of Georgia believes that, half doesn't. I'm no overt sympathist, with Georgian Dream, they have, against all law and decency, announced that publicly that they are going to create a database of undesirables that, even before you consider EU accession, is a no-go. Right here on this balcony last night, as night was falling, I took a bit of the mood in, and I am a good 20 minutes walk and up a steep hill or two from the main drag, Rustaveli Avenue, where the protests are. But the loudhailer voice was carrying right the way up, and you get this panoramic shot of the city here, where you will see how much the voice of a few, more than a few, but not a majority, of angry protesters is carrying over the whole city. And then, as it got towards actual dusk, I gingerly went down to Freedom Square, the start of Rustaveli Avenue. And from the opposite side of the square, you will see a central column, a kind of Nelson's column equivalent, which is St. George slaying the dragon. The far side of that, behind the flashing lights of the police and even fire brigade who are in attendance, you will hear the angry voices of these guys the evening they realised that they had lost the vote in Parliament. And this is really a Simpsons-level angry rant. The guy you'll hear is actually saying, won't someone think of the children? The next generation needs to have a future. Now, that might give you the impression that the whole city was full of disgruntled people, as Western media and US senators would have you believe. I went to stand 10 yards beyond that, and by the way, another 10 yards beyond that was a whole bunch of police pickup trucks parked out, and I have seen them, up to 8 wide and maybe 50 men deep, standing at that corner to prevent riots. In the last couple of days, wearing their black masks, special force police from the Interior Ministry. But this evening, there wasn't even that. And just, as I say, 10 yards between the street corner where the protest was and the police trucks, you see this much normal life going on. So not everyone is enamored of the protests by any means, and we'll play this bit out silently. You can see how much pushing and shoving was going on when the special forces got stuck in with the protesters. Of course, the people of a Western bent will zoom in on this and disregard the context of what kind of provocations happened before. But it is an intimidating lot, particularly if you see a lot of them out with their masks on. Sometimes they just wear COVID masks, in a sort of thin pretense that they're worried about catching an infection, but really to obscure their identities. Sorry for the inadvertent click there. Now, as I've just trailed, Grant Shapps was asked what His Majesty's government thought about this on the tail end of a Sky News interview. He's by no means an expert in the Caucasus. He's General Secretary of State for War, but he made these remarks.
I wanted to ask about Georgia. At the weekend, to Trevor Phillips, Lord Cameron said, we actively support the Georgian people and we've made clear to the government this bill is wrong. It seems his warning was not sufficient. If the bill passes today as expected, what will be the UK government's response?
Well, look, this is, for those who haven't been tracking this, Russian interference in Georgia, just in the same way as we've seen Russia, in a more aggressive way, of course, go into Ukraine. Putin cannot help but meddle, sometimes militarily, sometimes through using influence in other countries in a way which is not good for this world. It's not good for freedom or democracy. And so we do condemn that influence, and we very much encourage people to resist that influence from Russia. I think they should, not least because, Putin has demonstrated, and not least in Georgia, that he's not good for the world and not good for his neighbours.
So we, quote, very much encourage the people of Georgia to resist. On the streets, that has to mean, doesn't it? Here is some peaceful resistance, some extremely media-savvy signs calling the Georgian Dream Party's members of parliament Judas because they only took a minute to pass the vote. Here is a kind of representative still image or two that I took of the very student-heavy crowd who've come out in EU and Ukraine colours. And in the posh parts of town, you see them all festooned with their EU flags. One schoolchild I saw had been clearly wearing the EU flag that she got for Europe Day a week ago as a kind of cape all week around her book bag. And, by Friday was still doing so when I saw her. So there is a lot of skew towards this. This is fair enough. This is, singing Ode to Joy on May the 9th and all very fun. But there are some, more extreme examples. So here up against the barricades that the police put up at Parliament, you saw people doing this, at least nominally in the name of the European Union, ramming the police with barricades. And you saw, of course, that the police had to do something about this. So they went out to nab the main protagonists. And, of course, there was lots of jeering because it was zoomed in on as if this was a random act of brutality. But it was an assault on the precincts of Parliament. I don't think that would be tolerated in many countries. And I stress, just a couple of hundred yards from here, the vast majority, even of downtown, let alone the rest of Tbilisi, is getting on with normal life and preferring to, go about its business unconcerned. There's a widespread feeling that these mainly young people are deluded and will not get anywhere, although the Georgian Dream Party is not very popular in Tbilisi itself. Just to wrap up then a couple more images. This is the kind of police show of force that you see, but it's very, very localized. Here is some jesting by the protester side. They're getting on Reddit. Well, they would. It's a Western social media firm, and they have got a meme where they're claiming that the Georgian parliament is up for sale or for rent for 83 lari a month, probably a reference to the number of MPs that voted for the act. During previous readings of the bill, we saw scenes like this inside the Georgian parliament. And then just finally, because I'm over time on this segment, to point out that, again, those with fluent English on social media have been getting on Georgia threads and saying, I think it's time for us to come out on the street. They're doing what Grant Shapps wants them to do. Should we wait? We can't wait till the election in November because they'll be rigged, kind of preempting the democratic process. And this one is probably an agent provocateur, claiming to be a Ukrainian veteran Maidan protester who's now saying to his Georgian brothers, come on, it's time to get heavy with the Russians, block the military road to Russia, it's your last chance. And many people replied, you're a troll. Even on the protest side. So we'll try to unpack this more in extra time, but I hope I've sketched that a small minority of the country is really up in arms about the Foreign Agents Bill, and the vast majority think there probably is a reason for it, even if they don't like the governing party much.
Brilliant, Alex. Thank you very much for that.